Hey guys, this is Lucas from Better Coding Academy. Today I'm with Patrick and we are going to be having a look at Svelte, which claims to do cybernetically enhanced web apps, and it claims to allow you to write less code. It has no virtual DOM and is truly reactive, so it allows you to do some complex state management, and we're going to be discussing this, going to be giving our opinions on it, and this is going to be a two-part series. So in this first part here, we're going to be talking over the syntax and the main benefits of Svelte, and then in the next part, we're going to be looking at integrating Svelte in a more broader context. So let's start off here on the Svelte website, and over here we've got just their website open over here. Under, I think it would be examples here. Let's just talk about the syntax here for Svelte. So Patrick, maybe if you want to give your thoughts on Svelte comparison
Yeah,
to other.
so it looks kind of very much like a templating language, but I think like one of the major differences you see straight off the bat is like the template and the script is kind of together in one file. So like oftentimes, say like in React, right? You kind of, what is this? Okay.
This is their demo here. So
Yeah, oftentimes in say like React, you can kind of like split the HTML out and then like into like JSX, right? So JSX is not really HTML; it's just kind of a way to generate HTML. Whereas this is actually HTML, and then the variables are within the same kind of web component style thing, which is kind of
so
cool.
it seems all to be like scopes,
encapsulated.
kind of.
Yeah, it's encapsulated.
And they seem to do the same thing with the styles as well. So this kind of also, I guess, mirrors web components in a way, because it's kind of like having a shadow DOM. But in reality, what they do is they obviously namespace it. So they use kind of custom class names. And one thing to note with all of this is that all these kinds of changes, so like the p tags changing and adding class names, all of this is done at runtime. So this isn't, sorry, all of this is done at compile time. So it's actually done prior to your code even gets deployed. So when you have your final JavaScript bundle, all of these class names have already been generated. So this is one of the things with Svelte, is like it claims that when it has a really low kind of, I guess, toll on the front end, on the user, because a lot of the compilation is done ahead of time, and there is no actual Svelte library that's included in the production bundle.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it
So a bit
claims
more on
smaller
that,
bundle size.
yeah, like all of the code is compiled pre-bundle, so you don't ship the bundle with a framework. It should ship as native JS. But like, surely the way it kind of transpiles, whatever they call it, or compiles, like there must be some inefficiencies involved, right? Like all kind of generated code cannot be that efficient. So
Yeah, and also,
like,
I mean, JavaScript in general, which is like, it has its own, I guess, inefficiencies
yeah,
there. Yeah,
yeah,
but I think that's kind of like, in a way, because there has to be some sort of, some sort of like boilerplate, because obviously it still depends upon something, some sort of
yeah,
framework. But
yeah,
just generally from kind of inspecting the generator source code, it seems to be very, very low
yeah,
profile. So it's just designed to be very minimalistic.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But like with all overheads, right? The point of overheads is when you get to a certain scale, the overheads are actually no longer overheads, kind of thing.
mm,
So for example, let's just say you have a shop and you have a lot of cash registers, right? And you just count the money, and then when you start off, it's fine. But let's just say you have like 50 cash registers, then it's a lot more efficient to be maintaining like a point of sale system, even though it doesn't make sense for your original 10. But eventually, you'll get to a point where the framework itself is more beneficial than not having it due to
yeah.
scale. So, like, one of the worries
So
I
you're
have
making that
with
point
Svelte
more in
is,
favor of React, or like where basically
well,
something that has a
just
framework.
generally how like it will just try to, because there's no framework, so everything has to transpile into native JavaScript, right?
Yeah.
So there must be some duplication involved. Like, let's just say you have two buttons and they share like kind of like a state, right? Like a loading state or something like that. Or you both check for, I don't know, what does React do that is special?
I think the whole concept here is like, in terms of Svelte, is that you can't have like as you said, if it truly is native, then there are a lot of things that there aren't there, or even just like state and like props and all that. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right. Like if you re-implement this observable, I can never say that word, management kind of thing in two different buttons. And this, if you extract it out into a single framework like RX, right, just going to ship it twice in two components. So even though individually they're lighter, like they function individually lighter, but together they can benefit from sharing core framework.
And I think I guess that thing is a little bit misleading in the sense because they claim to have like it's all like on the homepage here, it's all compiled and there's frameworkless vanilla JavaScript, but in a sense, technically speaking, React does this, like in Webpack it does the same thing, regardless of what JavaScript library you use, because the final code you get is technically vanilla. Because it's like a big bundle anyways. And I mean,
it is vanilla.
either they're both vanilla or neither of these are vanilla, if that makes sense, because Svelte does have some overhead, but I think what they're talking about here is that the amount of overhead they have for the amount of functionality they provide is relatively minimal.
Right.
Like if you compare this to like style components, which does all of that at runtime, it's still a big difference here.
Yeah. Right. So it does ship with like a little bit of frameworky stuff. It doesn't just okay.
And I mean, you can tell because in the examples here as well, like if you look at the JS output, you've got the Svelte internal here as well.
Yeah.
So that has to be something, even though it's not very big. Anyways, so in terms of the syntax, there's like this strong use of kind of this, as you said, a templating language, and it combines it with variables using let inside of a script tag. So the script tag is like the authoritative JavaScript source, and this down here is the template. So then when you get to more complicated examples, you can kind of see how it works. So this is how you kind of put it in. They've got this syntax here, which I guess is some sort of shorthand, and this would replace with Rick Astley here. So I just wanted to have a look at, so this one here, for example, would be a basic kind of clicking interaction type thing. So in terms of mutating, what it just does is it just does plus equals 1 in the code, and it's assumed that it just shows straight away inside of the template.
Yeah, so with stuff like this, right, are mutations bad? Like, I know some people that are so damn strong against mutations, like, it's like they breathe and preach functional programming. And then if you're not using functional programming principles, they just like basically slam you for being like a cowboy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here is like, so I've heard of this argument, right? Like there's a lot of, when you read in React, right, there's a lot of articles and stuff pushing forward functional style, immutable style coding.
Yep.
But and that kind of has a lot of performance benefits, shadow comparing, etc. But here, because with like Vue and Svelte, you kind of, it's not like that. Like, it's not built from ground up to be functional.
Yep.
So is this a good or a bad thing, in your opinion?
I would say I view it differently because I don't see it as a performance benefit type thing, because I think there are always bigger issues than whether you're using functional or otherwise. I see it as a kind of like back in the days of like C, I think it was Fortran, I'm not even sure which language because I've never done this, but they used this thing called goto, which basically allows you to go around your code. Goto was basically considered to be a really bad practice because because they used it instead of for loops. The reason it's bad is because you can't tell where exactly you are in your code and which kind of state you're in. And I think that the same kind of problem can arise when you kind of do like I guess this would be like imperative programming. So it's like, one thing reacting to another. So then you just, at a certain point right here, it's really simple because you've just got one count. But if your count then depends upon 3 other things, which then in turn mutate the original thing via, say, an event listener or something and an observable, then all of a sudden you've got this state that you can't predict, So I don't like that kind of separation. But what I would say on the other hand is that this isn't about whether you use immutable programming or not. It's about how well you design your overall system. So if you use Svelte and you do it properly, it's better than if you use React and you do it poorly. Like that's kind of my point here.
Yeah, 100%. I kind of agree with that as well. Like I don't think FP is the end or be all. And honestly, like all the older code like C#, Java, etc. That's probably not functional, right? Like Java is OO.
Yeah, it's not.
And all these major enterprises are definitely running off stuff like that, right? FPs.
Yeah, I mean,
at scale is kind of a new thing.
Truthfully, functional programming is not like, it's not something you can apply at scale, go by 100% of the time. It's like,
I agree.
Like especially because I guess both of us are JavaScript. In JavaScript, as JavaScript developers, you try to use functional programming in specific contexts, and you try to apply the principles
Yep.
in a broad, like for example, instead of using a for loop, most of the time use .map or use
Yep.
dot for each or whatever, because
Yep.
that's more functional and that makes cleaner code. It makes it more easier to understand. But that doesn't mean that you start applying currying, you start applying monads just for the sake of it, you know, and that wouldn't be applicable, especially in a broader context where other people won't do that.
I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but I guess, so I mean, this is okay. I think it's okay. You just need to manage it properly. And what Svelte actually does is they have this kind of API which allows integration with, I think, with RxJS. They have their own like kind of internal observable API which follows the same syntax. So I think you can kind of do duck typing there with that. But we can have a look at that in just a second here. So there's something else about their syntax here which is worth noting, which is that their JavaScript is a direct, I guess a direct superset of equivalent ES 2015 plus JavaScript. So they have like, for example, this syntax here, which I found out is actually technically valid JavaScript. So this is like some kind of, like this is kind of technically useless in JavaScript, but
I've seen it
that's
in
what they do here.
flow types. Like I think you can declare variables like that in flow as well. But anyway, it is JavaScript.
Oh, because so then that way flow also, yeah, okay.
Yeah, like you can have like really specific types. Anyway, yeah, like.
But I mean, truthfully though, like when I looked at this first, I thought it was a syntax error, you know, and it's not like this isn't necessarily, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. I mean,
useful.
yeah, it's not really,
normally,
yeah. You wouldn't use this normally. So I would say that this isn't, like, syntactically speaking. I think if you're going to go for something which is different out of the ordinary and in a way like wrong, because you know you're not using let, you're not using var or anything here, so you're not properly defining it. You're using like a $ in front of it in order to get across a completely different purpose. I think if you're going to go like, because the $ here does something completely different than what it does in normal JavaScript, which is like basically a nickname kind of thing, like a label. So then if you're going to do that, then I think you might as well go off the deep end and make something new entirely, because otherwise you just kind of like, if you go halfway, it just seems kind of weird. Seems like a weird choice.
Yeah, I agree, because what if you actually want to use $ as a label? You can't. You're like banned from it now.
So then, because this changes the semantics completely, so that's something I don't completely agree with when it comes to the design of the language, I would say. And the other thing here would probably be, was it the props that we looked at? Yeah, this one. So with the props here, kind of the same situation. You've got the props passed in, very similar to React here, but in nested here, the way that you actually get props in is you use the export keyword. So it's almost as if the export let answer is like the parameter, and then you get past the argument.
Yeah, like you said, this one's a bit weird because it's like, it looks like an exporting answer outside, but it's just, you're just exporting kind of like the reference of answer outside, so hence you can edit it kind of thing. Yeah, it's a bit weird.
I'm not sure about this one though, because it makes it seem so like, I don't even know. Like, I just think the naming convention here, like, there could be a better way to name it. Like, even if you make something up, you know, rather than try to go for some syntax that is similar, but still makes no sense. You know, like, it's technically valid JavaScript, but it makes no sense. So
it's exactly right. Like, exporting inputs are all used for module handling kind of stuff. So just like reusing it's just weird.
When we,
what else is there?
So the other one was, I guess, where was the one on
this? What is this click once thing? It's like this.
Which one?
Just where you were before. It was like on click, and then there's like a pipe once.
Okay. Oh, I see. So if you click one time, right? So it's like a one-time running.
Does it really need that though? Like, why would it ship with that? I don't know. I mean, it's nice to have, but
it ships with some really, really quirky things. You know, like it ships with like animations built into transitions here.
Like
so
really
you've got
you've
got really nice inbuilt support, like in Fly. Like it literally has a built-in Fly. Like that's not something they wrote. This is built into Svelte, which I think is a weird choice. I don't know.
I don't know as well.
I'm not sure about that one.
I mean, I guess it ships with it, so whatever. Yeah.
So I guess this would be something that you would basically compile into your bundle from from like supposedly you say runtime, but it basically this becomes part of your bundle.
Yeah,
So it
probably.
obviously
Yeah, it,
you know and
it most likely shakes the stuff you don't
mm, yeah
use out. But I think shipping with transitions is just it's not a good idea, man. Because
yeah
like
I agree.
you know how like eventually you're gonna look at it and be like, oh, that looks like a svelte animation,
Mm.
like just the timing, the easing and stuff, and you just recognize it as a like a svelte library,
Yep. I
and I
think
don't know,
personally my
just
view on
switch out into
transitions
it
just
later.
over the years is like transitions have changed so much. Is
Yeah,
like
that's
back in the days we had jQuery of like and using like all that kind of stuff.
Yep,
And then
geez
from
that.
jQuery they moved to we had like React Transition Group, GSAP as well,
Yeah,
React Spring, React
Spring
Motion. All these things
motion.
kind of
Yeah.
change and then it always gets better. So then it seems to me like transitions is kind of like security. So like it's almost like don't try not to
Okay.
do your own, use someone else's, but also at the same
Mm,
time don't ship with your own transitions
yeah,
module.
I think
Yeah,
so. I think so. Yeah, I think that's definitely true.
because you
It's
end up
weird.
building your own thing in like say transition group and you go all out on it, but then all of a sudden React Spring comes out and you could have
Mm,
rewritten your whole thing in 3 lines of code. So it's
yeah,
like what's
yeah.
the whole point of that? So
Yeah,
that's kind of my
exactly.
view. Yeah,
And
yeah,
transition is it's very like opinionated, right? Like a UX guy might be like, just doesn't look quite right, but this one looks right. Spring looks right, and he probably can't explain to you why. Um,
yeah.
so
It's like the little
yeah,
bezels, the little timings and all that kind of stuff into your
yeah,
curves. Yeah,
exactly. Just the way it animates. So you don't want to force them to use one way to animate.
totally. There was the other thing I wanted to look at was the one where was it the subscriptions? Yep, this one. So this is something about kind of their solution to Redux or like data management across the app. So they've got
Oh, this.
account in stores.js. So obviously, plus, minus, and then reset. Stores here, so they use this concept of a writable.
Hmm.
So a writable value of 0. And in the incrementer, so dollar count, okay, so essentially, I think this is a simple example here. So the count comes from stores.js here, which is the writable. And then this is like a kind of like a RxJS thing. So then you can kind of observe the value of it. So when you
Yep.
subscribe to the value, you use this count.subscribe, which changes the value. And then this passes back unsubscribe, which isn't being used. I'm not sure about this one, but
Yeah, I don't think it's being used
I don't
because
think
you're
it's being
meant
used
to.
here. Yeah,
Yeah, but anyway, yeah, because there's like a sort of like an unmount register, and you're meant to pass that in
meant to
for
pass that in.
memory.
But then the value
see
gets
it.
passed in here, so then that kind of goes up or down. And inside of increment or decrement, use .update to change the value. So basically, this is their kind of, I guess, solution to it, is that they use RxJS and the RxJS way of passing data. But I do
Yep.
think that they don't use RxJS internally. I think they have
Really?
their own kind of API,
Oh,
which is equivalent to
really?
that. Yeah. So
Oh,
when they do like Svelte store, which
I
component?
thought it was like somewhat compatible though.
It is
Like
compatible,
it's
so you
just
can
a bit.
use RxJS in it, but it's not the same. Like it's not the exact same library.
Okay.
It just has, I think, the same
Yeah,
syntax or something. Yeah,
it's a bit weird. Yeah.
because you see in the
Yeah.
source code generated here.
Yep.
Oh wait, you can't even see it because. Okay.
So
Can't see it. Yeah.
I know the next one is like auto subscription. But yeah, oh sorry, but go back. Yeah, don't really want to jump all the way. So go back to writable stores. And can I look at the store and the other thing again?
This one.
Yep, yep. So const, yep, that's a writable. So that's basically an observable, pretty
Yep.
much.
Yep.
Yep. And what about resetter dot svelte? Oh, that's just a different thing. Ignore that.
Yeah. So all three of these just set the value.
Yeah, and then this incrementer dot svelte. Sorry, the incrementer. Okay, cool. It's count dot update. Yeah, okay, I see. Yeah, so this is
then
like
this
a
one,
really
yeah.
long-winded way to do the stuff. Yeah, fair enough.
So they're just showing kind of the separation, and I guess ideally you'd have obviously bigger things across more components. Yeah.
Yeah.
Separated here. I'm actually really interested in the svelte/store. I wonder if we can find it here somewhere. Runtime. Store. Okay, so this is the file.
It's the
Svelte
declaration
internal.
though. This is the interface.
Oh, is
It's
this
just the
only the
types.
interface?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so they
Okay,
wrote
yeah,
their
it's
own.
got the implementation.
But I think that the API is compatible with RxJS because in the example we looked at last time, they used Svelte, like they used an RxJS store with the dollar sign straight away. So I
Mm.
think the two are compatible.
Yeah, yeah. It's weird. It's weird.
But it's
Well,
yeah, it's their own kind of thing.
it's compatible for now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. Hey, it's like right now Svelte and RxJS agree, but then you get to the next RxJS major version or something happens in Svelte, and then all of a sudden you're kind of fighting on an uphill battle as you just kind of
Mm.
keep going. I feel like you might have some sort of feature split from there.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And that RxJS observable thing, I can never say that word. It's actually related. So the dollar, sorry, yeah. So this, the dollar sign is how you kind of subscribe to values,
Yep.
which is why putting a dollar sign in front of the variable also unwraps the observable. Because
So this also unmounts, unsubscribes it. Is that?
no, it subscribes and
Yep.
unsubscribes. Yeah, it listens to it because before the variable was declared yourself, right? In the first example,
Yep.
of no, sorry, at very very top. So the dollar sign, yeah, that weird syntax or something.
Oh, the this one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so this is not a observable, but it's still observed by the dollar sign, declaring it this way.
So you're using the same. Oh, so the same. So what
Yeah,
they're trying to do is they
yeah,
use the same dollar sign to.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So just saying, yeah. So all that lengthy like unsubscribe, subscribe thing is kind of mitigated by the weird syntax again. So yeah, just to touch on that point. I mean, cool. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
no quarrels there.
But I mean,
guess.
I guess that's the syntax. So with Svelte, they focus a lot. They use obviously an like observable based, subscription based type model. They have some quirky syntax choices. I wouldn't say I agree or disagree specifically, but you know that's kind of their decision as to how they put their thing together. But with Svelte, I guess the main benefit that I want to talk about today and kind of go over here is the performance. So the whole benefit and like the whole I guess selling point of Svelte is the performance benefit, right? It's like it's kind of there was this talk here by Rich Harris, who's the creator of Svelte, I think. So he actually talks about in this video here. I won't go through the video, but there is a part in here where he shows this demonstration here. Now this one was I think originally done by Dan Abramov for React, and he also took the same demonstration here and he rewrote the same thing in Svelte, and he showed how there was like far less kind of jarring. Like there was literally zero jarring in the concurrent Svelte version, so it didn't even need asynchronous support and it was running really well. So the main benefit here of Svelte is that you know, maybe by not having a virtual DOM, by having other performance benefits associated with it, it actually allows for a lot better performance than React in this given example. So then that can transform into the real world in scenarios where you need that kind of support.
So going back to the virtual DOM, right? So the reason why, like you said, like one of the main selling points of Svelte is the performance. And the reason is because they don't have a virtual DOM. They ship the thing into JS
Yep.
entirely. It's not using like kind of like re-rendering state management kind of patterns. It's just kind of a value changes and then some JS changes. So kind of more RX observable type, right? So what happens is it means that updates just go directly to the DOM. So in React, right, an update happens, it runs through React. React then creates the future version of the DOM
Yep.
and then does a diff and then just tries to replace the bits that are needed because replacing the whole thing's too expensive.
Right.
But you still have this overhead, like the middle layer, the reconciliation layer, where like the DOM is staged to a certain extent before it gets committed to the actual DOM.
But then Svelte takes that away and just completely just goes straight for the DOM.
Yes, it takes that away. But then theoretically, right, doesn't jQuery do the same?
Theoretically, so yeah, because with jQuery, obviously you specify exactly what you want to change, and it directly
Exactly.
modifies the DOM. But I
Yes,
guess the benefit of Svelte, or what they're saying, is that like there's some degree of declarativeness that you can have
Yes.
with Svelte components, whereas you don't have that with jQuery.
It's much more modern syntax as well, yes. But we know that highly dynamic jQuery apps are less performant than React apps because there's no architecture in the app. Like people just update crap everywhere, and then they try and listen to this thing, which listens to that thing, and then
Yep.
you have to do all this custom code for infinite loops. So for example, just two menus having in sync, right? Like if one changes, you need to change the other one. You got to have a way to stop it from like bouncing back and forth. So do you think this problem will just happen in Svelte if your app becomes highly dynamic and big enough?
I don't
Because
know.
I think it
I
might.
feel like you can, if you design it properly, it won't. Like I think it's the same thing, right? Like if you don't design it properly, yes, it will happen. But if you design it well, then it will not be an issue. That's what I
Mm.
personally think.
But you could,
Because with
yeah,
something like, because if you think about it in React as well, you can kind of have the same problem, right? You can do some really, really stupid ways, use some
yeah,
really stupid ways to manage
yeah,
data. And
yeah.
it allows you to do that. And I think the same is true with Svelte, except if you do it well, like say you have, in the count example before, if you have a value stored in an observable and you use that properly, then the amount of overhead is not really that great. But with jQuery, I think the problem is that when it's too bare bones, people tend to, I guess, when they have that kind of curve that you have to go through, many people just kind of go straight from, simple imperative code to really, really complicated spaghetti imperative code. And they don't think about how they can refactor this to be declarative, right? Because if you use jQuery, you can still like kind of, back in the day, you can use like Backbone or like RxJS to kind of
Yeah,
have that
yeah.
observable.
You can do
You can
whatever
still
you
do
want.
that,
Yeah,
right? But, and theoretically that could be really performant. But the problem is that
yeah.
people didn't do that. And I think Svelte is what kind of enables you to have a little bit more structure whilst not enforcing a virtual DOM. So I think that's the main thing that they're kind of going for here.
Yeah, so that structure bit was kind of the crux of the thing. It's like I'm not so convinced that Svelte gives you enough structure to actually write clean code in a team environment at least. Like obviously, if you're writing a small app by yourself, you can refactor, you understand the entire architecture. But if you're like getting handed down a project and you know nothing about it, and it's like 10,000 lines of code, and you need to make all these features, like how are you supposed to update it, because there's no patterns, right? Like the team before you defined all the patterns, whereas in React it's like you kind of have globally accepted patterns. Yeah.
Do you think
Here
this
is just
also
like
is like the
no.
result of having, I guess, React being more popular? Is that why there would be more patterns in React?
Definitely yes, that probably definitely is. Definitely is, like with Svelte, and but partly also because of the language. So like in extreme cases, like Angular is like, it's not because it's more popular. It's because that's just the way it is, right? Like Angular is like you have to do it this way. This is how you do it.
Yeah. So they define
React
it
is
very,
like
very clearly.
yeah,
That's it.
very
Yeah.
clearly, and it defines a lot of things, right? Whereas React, you even in React you have this problem where like different developers and teams use React differently. Like they do different things, and people start complaining about it because they're like, oh, React doesn't tell you like the right way to do a certain thing. For example, forms is like the death example where there's like a gazillion form implementations and they're
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone does it differently and have a different philosophy, and React doesn't really tell you how it should be done. I think Svelte is even like one layer below that, where it just like doesn't. It's not even kind of like a framework. It's like almost a framework. It is a framework, but it's like a really light framework. So
I
then
think
I have a
technically
feeling.
speaking, you wouldn't call React a framework because React doesn't enforce certain things, whereas Svelte definitely enforces more things than React. Like they have their own
You think
built-in
so?
like they have their own built-in transition library. They have their own like kind of, Redux equivalent, which technically React doesn't have. So obviously they have like internal state, which is like less and all that. Like that's kind of React. But when you talk about the writable and the store, that's something that they've decided, hey, this is something we're going to build and this is something we're going to let people use like out of the box, right? And the same goes for transitions. And obviously there are other things there we didn't even look at in examples. So I think if you want to talk about frameworks, Svelte is more of a framework than React. So I would
Fair enough.
kind of
Fair
disagree in the
enough.
sense that like they define a lot of patterns. Like they kind of, I guess, thought about this issue, and they have things like, for example, they have like even for like SVGs. Wow, that's pretty cool. But things like that.
SVGs are just yeah
Yeah,
HTML.
so they have like a lot of things like they have easing libraries, animation, transitions, out of the box. So
Yeah, like
this would be more of like framework than React would.
Yeah,
Technically.
the animation, like, I'm not that sold on because it's got nothing to do with data. Like, the animation is just something that sits on top, kind of thing. It just ships with it. Like, it's parallel. Because what makes your app good or bad is the data flow and the data management.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. Like, they do ship with their own RX equivalent, which is better, like their own store, which is better than telling you. But then technically React ships with state, so, and consumer in context. So I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's fair in the sense that with Svelte, I think like if you want to do a direct comparison with React, there are a lot of things in React that are also available in some form in Svelte. And if you want to talk about, I guess, you know, upsides versus downsides, I think the main thing that Svelte claims is the performance benefit. And the example that Rich Harris gave actually, like, it blew me away in terms of how much better that actually was. So just in terms of losing that virtual DOM and having that extra performance benefit, I think that's definitely a win for Svelte. But when it comes to the syntax and when it comes to people using it across the board, and when it comes to certain decisions they may have made in terms of the templating language, the choice of data flow mechanisms, they might have, might have alienated some people, I would say. And like their choices might be a little unconventional. But I think the main thing with Svelte here to talk about here is that it's not like, I guess, the syntax or their choice of, data flow mechanisms, but it's focus on this performance aspect, which React and, other libraries have kind of forgotten about in a way. And like, React 16, like the whole point of React 16 was fiber, and they and like asynchronous rendering and all that kind of stuff is focusing on getting performance back into React, whereas from Svelte that was kind of something that's been there from day one and is always continuing to be there. So I think that is really kind of admirable, and it's also really important to have that focus on performance within the library.
Yeah, you see, yeah. Like, I understand where it's going at, but I'm not that convinced that it will stay fast forever. Yeah. Because the virtual DOM's there for a reason. The virtual DOM's there to not update things that doesn't need to be updated. But then the lack of virtual DOM now means that this might happen.
So you feel like maybe the performance benefit at a certain, would you say within like the number of components you have on your page, would that be the main factor?
Number of maybe interconnected components, so like they kind of all depend on each other. Yeah, because how does this know whether or not to update the DOM? Because it could be putting the same value in. So say you update a table, one value change, right, and you drop in the entire JSON of a new table. Only one value needs to update, but this doesn't have a virtual DOM, so wouldn't it just try to update the whole table?
I guess we'll have to find out.
Yeah.
We'll have
like
to see.
I feel like for small apps, it's like, yeah, sure, of course you're going to have a much better performance because you're not bringing a jackhammer to do like a screwdriver's job. Whereas if you use React to try and like build, I don't know, a sortable table, that's like your entire page, that's like huge, right? But I feel like at a certain scale, like the benefits of React, there will be truly pros and cons. Like it'll be a much more even playing field, I think.
I think the other alternative that I kind of see as a possibility is instead of updating the whole table, as you mentioned, they do a direct comparison on the DOM itself. So then they say, hey, look, we're going to compare this row with the DOM, and if it needs updating, update. Otherwise, don't update. And I think that might lend to performance benefits. But I think what we need to do is, in part 2, maybe we'll kind of go through Svelte and we'll look at the actual implementation in a bit more detail when it comes to like the performance benefits. And then from there, we can kind of see, hey, look, does this actually have any noticeable performance gains over React? Like even in the like long term, because in the short term with a small app, obviously you can kind of see certain things, but in the long term, what is the actual diffing mechanism they're using? What is their claim to performance, and is there actually any evidence that it will hold up over time? I think that's something we should have a look at. But that is for a second part. So maybe are there any things you want to kind of say to wrap up to talk about regarding Svelte? What would be your general recommendation, I guess, at this point to kind of with regards to this?
Heaps of things. Like there's definitely a lot of pros of it. And so firstly, it's much cleaner than jQuery and much more modern. So if you're building like a widget, you don't want to ship a framework.
Yeah.
Well, jQuery technically is like, a big enough library anyway, but you can just use this. So you don't want to ship React, you don't want to ship Angular, but you want a way to kind of build like a modern little widget. Let's just example live chat booking widget or something, like, you know, where people can just embed onto their page and
Yep, yep. And
whatever.
especially if your existing system is a legacy system, right? So
Yeah,
like,
that too.
yeah. So then you can just kind of plop it in, so to speak.
Yep, yep. So that, yeah, so that's super good. Also maybe like certain parts of your app that are super render heavy, you don't want to kind of mesh it together with React. So for example, your entire frame is in React, but then you have like one bit that is like a highly interactable chart, kind of like the demo Richard Harris showed,
Yeah.
and you kind of realize React is not doing so well. You might just want to pull it out and put it in Svelte.
Put it in Svelte.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
But
just
I
kind of
think
mount it on
definitely,
somehow.
you know, give it a try. Like my recommendation would be similar. I'd say that there are use cases for it, and you know, the syntax is a bit quirky, but it's worth looking at, worth learning about, and especially with regards to its performance philosophy, it's really, really worth checking out.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
on the next episode, we will be having a look at Svelte in a bit more detail. We will be analyzing the library. We will be reviewing the diffing that it actually does and giving you our thoughts on that. But this is all we have for you in the meantime. This has been Lucas and Patrick with Better Coding Academy, and see you guys later.
Cool. See ya.